Hi, today's May 3rd, 2023, and I'm honored to have with me Professor Laurens Buijs. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what's new since we last met.
Hi there. Thanks for having me again, Randall. So my name is Laurens, and I'm a sociologist, a social scientist at the University of Amsterdam. I work on, especially my main field is gender studies. And in January, I came out in the university's newspaper as a whistleblower. I filed an official whistleblower complaint to the board of the university. And the whistleblower complaint is basically making the claim that research and education at the University of Amsterdam at the social science department is so much compromised by woke culture and cancel culture that basically one can speak of violation of European law. Because in European law, we have a law that guarantees academic freedom.
Mhm.
And basically, my statement has been that as an official whistleblower covered by Dutch law, I made this claim that the university social science department is so far off the rails in terms of ideology, and that the ideology has become so extreme that free thinking and free research has become impossible. So I filed that complaint, and the university didn't like it. The board didn't like it, and the dean didn't like it, and professors didn't like it because this became a big problem for the institution, and they had to follow up on my whistleblower complaint by installing an independent research committee. And that research committee is currently researching my claim. It's three professors from other universities that came into the University of Amsterdam that are researching the institute at this moment. They will come out in June and with their final verdict. And in the meantime, the situation has escalated so much between me and the department, and also the internal politics of the social science department has exploded so much that I am now on the verge of being fired, but the institute is also on the verge of a total meltdown. So that is a brief introduction to the situation that I am now.
Well, that's amazing. We met and spoke a few months ago. Um, you look great. I know it's been a lot of stress, but it hasn't
Yeah.
hasn't shown up in your hair. Actually, you know, people I think would be jealous to look like you. You're, seem vigorous, um, lively. How has this affected you on a personal, emotional basis? Say first, maybe we can, get in some more of the professional aspects. But what has your, day-to-day life has been like? I assume, there's a college. Your university college, collegium, I think is from Latin to read together, if I'm not mistaken. And colloquial is similar to talk together. And so the whole concept of college is to be together and to talk together and to read together. So how's the togetherness thing doing within and without the campus and your personal social life and within the personal social life of professors?
Yeah, that's a great question, and right to the point if you ask me, because I think this togetherness that I also think is the core of college life, of university life, has totally imploded in my personal life. But in general, I think the divide and conquer culture at the University of Amsterdam Social Science Department has become so extreme that mainly it's now about camps. So people are divided in camps for and against woke, and as the woke camp is very strong at the University of Amsterdam, but and there is resistance, but the resistance is silent because people don't dare to speak up because they are afraid that they will be cancelled and they will be accused of racist or of transphobic, of Islamophobic. So there's this fear culture, and people. There's a lot of people who are sick of it, but they don't dare to speak out. I did, and my life has turned into, yeah, it was really like a hell, I have to say. Like, it was really a very stressful time. This is something that you don't even think that your worst enemies deserve this, to become a whistleblower and then to be scapegoated like this, because this is in one word, I think, what has been happening to me, the word scapegoating. um, I have been working for 15 years in the University of Amsterdam. It also feels like my home. I have friends there. I started my own education programs there. I initiated so much. I was head of the LGBTI movement of the University of Amsterdam for a couple of years. I have groups of friends on the campus. It's like my second living room. I always used to call it like that. Yeah. And now suddenly I even have a campus ban. I'm not allowed to go on the campus anymore. I'm not allowed to speak to my colleagues. There, people frame me as a far right, derailed person who went off the rails, who is a transphobe, who is, and only because I gave criticism on the extreme parts of the trans movement and the LGBT movement. And I'm a trans ally, and then I'm an LGBT ally. I am gay myself, you know. So, and then now they frame me as I am a sort of Jordan Peterson to the max. Yeah? They frame me as if I am totally derailed enemy. So yeah, for me, it has been very extreme to witness this, to experience the scapegoating, and then also to be threatened and intimidated by the university, by the dean, by the board. It has been a nightmare. I lost contact with all of my colleagues. I even lost contact with the colleagues that I was publishing with. I lost contact with my PhD supervisor. So my whole research program came to a halt. And yeah, I think it has been very extreme what has been happening. And so what I would like to say is, as a gender scholar, I would classify myself as gender critical. And gender critical basically means that I'm very skeptical to the now dominant idea in woke culture in gender studies that every person can decide for themselves what their gender identity is. I don't think that self-identification is the only valid method to determine whether you're a man or a woman. I think that's a false idea and a problematic idea. I think there's more to that than self-identification. Yes, there is people with gender dysphoria, but there is also, you also have a body. There's also the psychological world. So I think it's very problematic that we believe everybody who says I'm a trans person or I'm a non-binary person. I think we need more than only what people identify as themselves. And this statement, which, by the way, is a statement that many scholars take in international published literature and peer-reviewed journals, even more extreme position than that. And I take a rather moderate position, protecting trans rights, but saying, yeah, but I'm also critical to what I also see as sort of a hype that people, and especially young people, want to be trans and they claim it as a badge for their ego. I'm critical on that. So I think we need to have good checkups and to have a good classification system that we can select who is like a genuine transgender person and who is not. And by just saying this went exploded and there is no discussion possible. So there's only one dogma at the university. The UvA, the University of Amsterdam, is known as a progressive left-wing university, progressive in terms also in gender and sexuality. So there is this one idea that everybody should follow, and that is that we should all accept everybody who claims to be LGBTIQ+. We should not raise any questions. We should not be critical. And I think that's very problematic that like people don't have to agree with me. I don't mind that people disagree with me, but we should have a conversation. And that is why I liked your question. I think university and college is about dialogue, about different viewpoints, about exchanging. Yeah. And then I think there is hypocrisy at the University of Amsterdam where everybody talks about diversity and inclusion, but it's not about viewpoint diversity. Yeah. So everybody should that people in the University of Amsterdam are so obsessed. Like, do we have enough people of color in the curriculum? Do we have enough Muslim students in the classes? What about women in professor positions? Is everything equal? Everybody's obsessed with diversity and inclusion, and also what they call decolonization, because the University of Amsterdam was involved with the Dutch colonial enterprise. So the people talk about slavery and about colonization, so everybody's about diversity and inclusion. But when you are critical on gender, or when you're critical on COVID, the vaccinations, or when you're critical on the multicultural society, then you're even from a left-wing progressive perspective like myself, then you're immediately framed as a far right-wing danger. that should be excommunicated from the campus. So yeah, I think this whole idea of diversity at the University of Amsterdam is rather hypocritical. I don't hear you now, Randy. Your sound is
I
off.
I apologize. They're cutting some trees outside, and
Okay.
I've been muting myself so I don't give any background noise. I
Right.
apologize. I imagine you can actually background noise is probably all you have in your life right now, but I didn't want to inject any here. So thank you for that. I kind of I'm interested in words and the roots. University. We talked about college a second ago, but university is for the universality, the bringing a totality of ideas and concepts, and it's essentially, there's the liberal arts, which we associate with freedom, liberty. The liberal arts were, I guess, a Roman ideal, that they were the things you needed to learn in order to maintain your freedom. Now there was, a little bit of dichotomy there because there were slaves and different classes of citizens, but if you were a free person, you had to learn the liberal arts, basically reading, writing, arithmetic, rhetoric, the four R's, so that you could converse and influence the world and keep it, working. And the Roman Empire, had a very good run as far as empires go, long, productive, and so forth. And there were cruelties and whatnot, as with any collection of human beings. So it's kind of funny that the UVA, the University of Van Amsterdam, takes this pose when the fact that there is one there that people flock to, and is in Amsterdam. It's not in Kinshasa, it's not in Kigali, it's not in Blantyre, it's not in Kabul, it's not in a lot of places. It's in Amsterdam for a reason, and so the legacy of the Dutch is there. And there you brought up so many different questions. The one I just want to point out as far as the wordsmithing goes is that university is actually almost the opposite of diversity in the sense, although they come from different words, sensibilities. One is universal, and diverse, I guess, I just have a division in a sense. But can you have diversity in a university? And if there is true diversity, as you mentioned, there's a diversity perhaps of color and religion and whatnot, but is it allowable to have diversity of religion? People can somehow change their sex. They can't change their age. Can they change their ideas? Is it allowable? Maybe you just should tell people that you have transitioned, in the same way, and it should be respected. And now your pronouns
Nice.
are, freedom of speech, and
Yeah.
that's what you want to be called. And I'm riffing here. I apologize, but there's a guy in the Boston Celtics last year. He got terminated. He's not in the league anymore. Uh, whether it was a skill set. His name is Enes Kanter, and he's a Turkish guy, and he's with that the anti-Erdogan minister. I can't think of it. Starts with a G, and he's out in Virginia, whatever. But it's kind of like the Falun Gong for Turkey. And so he's vilified, and he's under death threat if he were to return to Turkey. And he changed his name. He adopted American citizenship. He changed his name to Enes Freedom. So I think there may be a route for you, if you want to, put freedom or something like that in your middle name, and ask people to respect your new, pronouns and surnames and so forth, and have the freedom to transition to that identity that you actually adopt. Anyway, I guess the question I would have. I apologize for the diatribe, but the question I would have is, the Netherlands kind of has built itself up by accreting new land and taking land away from the. I'm not sure what is your what you call that piece of the Atlantic Ocean over there, but
North
maybe,
Sea. Yeah.
yeah, the North Sea is it. But maybe is there any hope or thought within the rest of the Netherlands to maybe divest and divulge and cut free the UVA, University of Van Amsterdam, to put it back into the sea? I mean, how does the rest of the Netherlands deal with this type of hothouse environment when it's so self-contradictory? Even the growing Muslim population in the Netherlands, are they happy with this? Are they going to be listened to? Are there going to be some real radical realignments of politics to kind of go secular or hyper secular versus religious? Anyway, that's just some of the things that are bubbling up in my head, and I
Mhm.
apologize. I must not have taken my adequate medication for that today.
I like your associations. So listen, what I as a response, what I feel like answering when hearing your interesting reflections is what I see in the Netherlands very much at this moment is an increasing divide between the liberal slash left wing elites and the general population. And I think this is something that I also see in the United States already for a longer time, where you see this sort of an empathy wall, as this has also been called in the literature by Arlie Hochschild, who is a sociologist, that we see that there's groups in the population who don't they live in such different truths that they cannot reconcile anymore. They don't live in the same Netherlands anymore. And so what I have been noticing at the University of Amsterdam is really like a bulwark of liberal ideology in the Netherlands, of left wing ideology. It is a strong powerhouse. And it has a lot of influential people who are well connected to politics, to the press, to the liberal establishment in the Netherlands. Yeah, so it's a lot of people in the University of Amsterdam high up. They have a lot of power in the mainstream politics. And what I've seen in the University of Amsterdam, that ideas have grown about wokeism, especially in the social science departments, how we should think about gender, how we should think about Islam, how we should think about multiculturalism, about COVID. It doesn't really matter, but ideas have grown there that are totally, out of synchronicity with the ideas that live in the general population. And so, in the general population, I have a lot of support as a whistleblower. A lot of Dutch people say to me, I support Laurens, and it's good that somebody finally draws the line. There's a lot of popular support behind me. This has also been the reason why I am still in the race, at least. I'm not totally fired yet. I still have some chance, and also the University of Amsterdam followed up on my whistleblower report because of pressure from the Dutch population, who is now saying, stop. We now want to know what's going on in these institutions that we all finance with our taxpayer money. What is going on there? Is this science or is this ideology? And a lot of people in the Netherlands are worried. Like, if I send my daughter or my son to university, what will they be brainwashed with propaganda, or will they learn to think independently and as an autonomous person? So people in the Netherlands are really wary of woke culture. They are alert, and they now demand basically, that these institutions like the University of Amsterdam takes responsibility and shows to the population what's going on. So there's a lot of popular pressure here. Yeah. So that in my view is, I see some hope there, that the University of Amsterdam, but maybe also other academic institutions, will reconnect with another Dutch tradition that we have, and not only the hyper political correct left wing tradition, but there's also another tradition in Holland, and that is of free thought, of tolerance, of Spinoza and Erasmus, the big Dutch philosophers. And so Holland is also the country that is known for pillarization and for radical dialogue between different groups, despite differences, still coming together. So this is something that I hope that can be sparked now in the Netherlands, in the universities, because I think this idea of radical difference, embracing radical difference as the core of the scientific project, we have lost touch with it. And we have now gone so far with political correctness, with ideals of diversity and inclusion, that we have basically undermined the core of the academic project. And that is for me what I'm so worried about. Yeah. And that I hope now finally can this whistleblower case of me and other things that are happening in universities throughout the Netherlands, because there is unrest and protest on campuses throughout the country about freedom of speech, about academic freedom. Different faculties, different staff members and students indicate that they feel they cannot think and speak freely anymore. So I really hope we can get a sort of a turnaround, and that we break through this political correct fortress, because that is what it is in my view at the moment.
Well, there's a lot there. My understanding, I don't know, do you have the tenure system there, where professors have tenure?
Yeah, we do.
So my understanding originally was the tenure system was there so that professors could speak their mind, and they
Yeah,
wouldn't be under threat of you know approbation, opprobrium, um, out in the world and so forth. It would bring an independence of thought, multiple, like a chorus of different voices.
yeah,
Maybe not a chorus, is not, it's not a good example. Um, um, More like a debate. Uh, but it seems to me that the tenure system has done precisely the opposite. That
yeah,
it's brought a spoils system where people want to, some people, the tenured professors basically get to grant it. Um, so because it comes a little bit like royalty, but an assigned royalty where they can, put that tag, that special sinecure on somebody else, and and therefore it kind of leads to a lockstep and a respect for the authority within the departments, that you have to follow that rule. I wonder if you have any thoughts about whether there's a systemic problem within universities in general, because certainly we see this here, and also. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bud Light controversy in the United States, and this is going to sound peripheral, but I hope it's not. What's her name? Alyssa Gordon Heinerscheid, who was sitting in New York City working for Anheuser-Busch in their marketing. She went to Harvard. I think she maybe went to Stanford. I apologize, but kind of elite university, and she's living an elite life. Um, and she's not of the country, say, where Bud Light might be a little more popular, say the Middle America. Um, and she decided to put Dylan Mulvaney, who's a man until very recently, on the cover, in his kind of Audrey Hepburn look-alike pose, and put that on a Bud Light can. And the audience tends to be, American football, as opposed to soccer watchers, and, kind of like, you know, kind of grittier guys who might want to diet a little bit. So it's not the mainstream beer. And she put that on. It was a huge backlash. And Budweiser has been down 26% in sales. And if you go to the stores, in Illinois and whatnot, the shelves are full of all the Anheuser-Busch products, which are actually owned by InBev, which I think is Dutch. Um, and every other beers gets sold out, and so there's a huge backlash, kind of a boycott and whatnot. But the point I'm going to make is that Anheuser Busch slash InBev slash Bud Light, whatever, Budweiser, is um, they are prone to vagaries of the marketplace and the voice of the market and the voice of the consumer, whereas the universities, with their tenure, which is supposed to give them independence, um, uh, wind up kind of insulated and isolated from public opinion, because the government pays them regardless, and
yeah,
there's no way to fail. And the example I used recently was, we have Amtrak and Enron. Enron was a company that failed. It did bad things, sort of, illegal, insider trading kind of thing, and they failed, and they're gone. And the lessons were sent out to other companies. And similarly, the Bud Light controversy are sending out to other companies that go woke, go broke. Whereas Amtrak, which is the United States train company, public company, they make mistakes over and over again. They never go broke. So I think, the University of Amsterdam is more in the Amtrak model, where they can continue to make mistakes until something cataclysmic happens.
yeah.
Uh, and so I don't know if you feel like addressing any of that. And then how can the change happen so that it can become a vibrant place, at least, from our imaginations and of what a university should be?
Okay, it's a lot of interesting questions. So yes, I do think there is deep systemic problems in the university. I've also seen them grow over the years. I've been employed by the University of Amsterdam for 15 years, and what I've basically seen is the rise of a very toxic sort of competitive culture for the very scarce positions in terms of professorship, but also PhD, postdoc, and teaching positions, research positions. A very toxic culture with a lot of resentment, a lot of elbows. It's a very hierarchical culture, the university culture in Holland, and also of the University of Amsterdam. So there's this tendency of scholars to walk in line of the people higher up in power. And the people higher up in power, they write their grant requests. Basically, what I see is that the most successful professors often they run their research departments as a sort of a company, and then an unhealthy company that is so focused on getting money in that they focus more on where is the opportunity for me to get money, and how can I grow, and that the whole idea of curiosity, different viewpoints, what do I want to know, what is the societal need to know, has been detached from what these people are doing. They basically run for a lot of, they often also in Holland, even tenured professors, they are writing funds. They do fund requests also at the European Union, but also at the Dutch government to have extra sort of research programs. So I see a lot of competition there. I see a lot of toxic resentment culture, a lot of elbows, a lot of hierarchy, a lot of soothing the people in power. So it's a very power play. There's a lot of power play going on. And I think that the establishment in the Netherlands, the political establishment, and also the corporate establishment, and it basically has grown to be very intimate with the scientific establishment. It has become a sort of a big inner circle of people high up in power who serve the same agenda. And I, as a left-wing person, I see basically what I see worldwide growing, but also in the Netherlands. It's very neoliberal. It is very also focused on surveillance, on control, on profit. So also the universities in Holland are very much focused on what are the developments in big tech, in big pharma. So we see that these corporations and these programs and also the big government programs have a lot of influence on the research agendas and on the scientific establishment and how they think and what they write about. So it's very political. And the problem is that the scientific establishment hides all this politics behind the facade of objective science. And people believe in this myth, even they often believe it themselves at the University of Amsterdam, that they do objective science. I always say to my colleagues, I don't mind that you have your interests as a scientist. I don't mind that you write your funds. I don't mind that you serve certain groups, but you have to be transparent about it. And then we have to see, is everybody represented well? Because in my view, in the core of the scientific project is not so much certainty, but it's more uncertainty. I think in the core, scientists have to work with uncertainty. There's a lot of things we don't know, and around uncertainty, the best thing we can have as scientists is as many perspectives as we can, so that we have this wide open, radical, pluralistic debate between different people with different visions, different perspectives on the same idea. Yeah, and if I take it just a small example, when it comes now, for example, to gender, but also COVID, the whole pandemic, what I saw is that certain perspectives win. And also climate change, for example, certain perspectives win and they take over, they present themselves as we are the consensus and therefore we are the objective truth. And very relevant other voices, I don't mind whether they are right or not, but relevant other voices are not even taken seriously. They're excluded from the debate and also often stigmatized with labels like you're unscientific, you're a conspiracy thinker, you're far right. So I see there's a lot of politics and divide and conquer in the sciences about whose voice is being seen as legitimate and whose is not. And I think there's very nasty politics going on there. So I think what I really think we need, this is also what I've been urging the University of Amsterdam to do, we need a very radical intervention, top down from the central board. They should say very radically, okay, well, basically at the University of Amsterdam, I think a solution would be, of course, we have to think about how can we slow down science a little bit? How can we put free thought again center stage? But also, what I think is interesting in the University of Amsterdam, the University of Amsterdam invested a lot in building an infrastructure of diversity. So now every department, every faculty has a diversity board and has a diversity committee, and there's a lot of policy and money and positions involved in diversity. So I say, if you leave that whole infrastructure in place, but add to their job description viewpoint diversity, Radical view. So don't only train teachers in how they can deal with the ethnic and religious diversity and become aware of their own unconscious bias, blah blah blah. It's all fine with me, but also train them and how can we deal with different perspectives without canceling, without disqualifying, without stigmatizing. Radical free thought. So I think we need to, basically, this whole diversity and inclusion program at the University of Amsterdam needs to be, integrated into I would say an academic free, the board of academic freedom. And diversity and inclusion is nice. It is interesting. It is good if you are respectful and open to different people from different backgrounds in society. But the core of the scientific process is always different viewpoints as to deal with this uncertainty. So this would be on the top of my head my response.
No, that's excellent. Um, I, I had a lot of things pop in my head, but I'm going to pass and just ask you. So there's a concept when liberal pieties collide. I think you're having this. There are a lot of things that again, probably not even liberal anymore. They're progressive. Um, uh, people espouse one thing and then they espouse another thing, and those things are inimical. So I think I agree with you that consensus is not science. Galileo went against the consensus. Copernicus went against the consensus. uh, Newton went against consensus. Einstein against consensus. And in the religious world, Jesus went against consensus. There Gandhi, whatever, Mandela. The fact that a lot of people will say something in what you rightly point out is oftentimes a sclerotic, hierarchical power institution grid and so forth. The fact that everybody agrees with something does not prove it's right. I mean, that is almost like the divine right of monarchies. That they say something and it's true because they said it, and everybody's going to agree, or else they lose their head. Literally, figuratively if they're lucky, but literally if they're not, or both. And so what's happened though is that humans, I think, always organize and they always form hierarchies. And so I think there's Animal Farm where I forget, this animal is more equal than some other animal. They're trying to come up with a communist, a commune, I guess. But even so, there are always going to be hierarchies. Even in the Holocaust, in the barracks of Auschwitz, people formed hierarchies. In the ghettos of Warsaw, there was the Judenrat, who were appointed hierarchically, to take command over the other prisoners, essentially. Death watch prisoners, but they had better benefits in the meanwhile. And so I think there's always this reward system, and lo and behold comes kind of this DEI diversity, equity, inclusion aspect, and or the words of racism and or thisism, anti phobe, your Islamophobe, you're transphobe, you're homophobe, whatever. All these forms, I mean, basically they're all incorrect words. There's not actual phobia in any of these cases. It's debate. And I'm just going to come up with an analogy because that's what I do. But Harry Potter was my kids grew up at the time that Harry Potter had just come out, and so we read a lot of Harry Potter. My older son was totally absorbed. This was his reading adventure, and the thing is, it's I grew up with Superman and Batman, and Superman comics themselves were written by young Jewish boys, young men in New York City at the time of World War II, and the Jews were downtrodden in Europe and so forth. They were powerless, and so these guys came up almost the Nietzschean Ubermensch. They came up with Superman as somebody who was going to fight for right and so forth. They had superpowers, and so Superman is Jewish, oddly enough, or he comes out of the Jewish mind. And Harry Potter, as we're finding out, comes from an interesting mind as well. But the thing about Harry Potter, it was Superman-ish. You could kind of, with a wink and a word and a wand and a spell, change things around you. So you don't like something, boom, that person's gone. That person turns into a frog or whatever goes on. And this is what happens. This is a magical world where the powerless, have taken power by virtue of their magic wand, which is calling you a blankist, a racist, a transphobic, whatever the word. And this is all ad hominem attacks, and we are, shamed as a group, and we're excluded as a group, and we're out. And so, in Harry Potter, there's the sorting hat where people are literally determined which group they're in, and it's very obvious that Slytherin is the bad people. You don't want to be that. That's Donald Trump, whatever. And then the I forget Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, whatever they happen to be. And so despite her having come up with this magical world, which captivated and whatnot, she wound up being excluded and kind of magically popped out as a turf. Whatever. I'm sure you're familiar with this
Sure.
concept.
Yeah.
But just to kind of get to a question, if you can either tug on that one if you like, or the other question I really have is about some of your actual research. We talked about it last time, dealing with violence against getting back to that word, homophobic violence from Islam, and I guess you'd have to be Islamophobic to point out the homophobia within Islam. So one's head spins. It's more like through the looking glass, to get back to children's stories than Harry Potter. But maybe you can talk about what's happened with J.K. Rowling, how she's become an epithet, and anything else there you want to work on.
Thank you so much again for your wonderful assist. So I think that it is so toxic, so poisonous that all these debates are basically made impossible by a very moralistic or sort of morality police, that very quickly you're accused of being a bad person. And in very, very strict terms, so this is, I think, the core of cancel culture. If you look at somebody like J.K. Rowling, I think more and more, like myself as a progressive person, I was also skeptical and cynical when she first uttered her critique on the trans movement. But I think we can now say, after a couple of years, that no, she was not a bad person. She was in many ways a visionary person. It is very clear that the trans movement has been radicalizing to such an extent that it is important that women and feminists speak out, because basically the trans movement is now a threat to not only the women's movement, but also to the gay movement, because they undermine the whole idea of gender, of being a man, of being a woman, of being attracted to the same sex or to the other sex. The whole idea of sex is problematized. So basically what we see is that this trans movement is now so radical that it is a threat to the progressive project. And so people like J.K. Rowling were and also other scholars in universities throughout the world, in the United States, Canada, but also in the United Kingdom, and who have been cancelled for very legitimate positions on, for example, trans, on, for example, LGBT, on, for example, women's rights. So what we see here is that a necessary dialogue is made impossible by people who appeal to an idea of, oh, I'm hurt. It feels unsafe. It feels threatening to talk about this. This is against my safe space. You should give out a trigger warning. If you don't talk about this in certain codes, then you are cancelled. And this makes an open and free debate very impossible. So this is also why I think that in the University of Amsterdam, we talk a lot about safe space. Because we imported a lot of North American classroom culture to Europe over the past years, and also to the University of Amsterdam. So also people in Holland in our universities are now talking about safe space, trigger warnings, etc. And I always say, like, okay, we should not only work on a safe space, but primarily on a brave space. Science, in principle, is about being brave, that you can even be hurt by the viewpoints of other people that are so shocking to you and your own worldview. This feeling of being hurt is essential to academic growth, that you feel sometimes so threatened by what you hear, that your own worldview is so fundamentally threatened by other ideas, that this is part of the Bildung, what we call in German, this whole process of academic growth, of forming an autonomous mind, that you are destabilized, that you feel attacked, that you have to look again for new ground, that for a couple of weeks or even months you are destabilized by your opponents. This is part of the game. And if you don't dare to step into that arena, and if you only want to be safe and hear the voices and the opinions and the arguments that you are used to and that are for you safe, then that is the opposite of an academia. And then you have nothing to do at a university. You should go to a church or whatever, you should find another profession. But this is not academia. So I think this whole idea of being brave should again be put on the forefront. And then we look differently at people like J.K. Rowling. Yes, looking back, she made some remarks that are hurtful, also to trans people, that also go too far for me as a person. But I'm allowed to disagree with her, and she's allowed to hurt me. And she's also allowed to hurt trans people. And then we can talk back and in arguments back and forth. And this is what I hope so much. Yeah? If I look at my students in the University of Amsterdam, they are now so spoiled in a way and so entitled. They are kind of so easy to press on the red button to say, I'm hurt. I am now, this is unsafe. This should be cancelled. That I'm worried. And I think the world at this moment is so dangerous. There's so many people with a lot of radical ideas, way more radical ideas than I have. If you even want to cancel me and you can't even have an argument with me, then yeah, then you also will not be equipped for a position as a citizen in this society. Yeah,
Well, I think we have the title for your next book, which is Brave Spaces, Not Safe
yeah,
Spaces.
yeah,
Um, I think getting back to the tenure concept, um, it actually in English it sounds like 10-year, if we're only 10-year, it might not be that bad. We have term limit for the president. And for a lot of other offices, there's the concept of term limits. There's no sense to have
yeah,
tenure if it doesn't accord with bravery. If it doesn't give you bravery, then you know what, you misused the tenure, and
yeah,
and so I suppose it's kind of inimical to the premise of giving tenure, which is like foreverness. There's no reason to have foreverness. We have it in the Supreme Court here. We have foreverness. That's not a word, but foreverosity, foreveritude, whatever, eternal life, I guess. But there's very few other places, unless you own something. Fine, if you own the company, if you're Warren Buffett, you can be the head of Warren Buffett till you're 90 x years old, whatever, that's fine. But even he has a way out, and he lets other people run things as his efforts decline. But this concept of tenure seems to be totally inimical to the concept of the basis of college and university. If they've abdicated and abrogated their agreement, they don't seem to be there. They've outlived that purpose. And so aside from, so I don't want to, I've already titled your next book. Now have a proposition for your next career, which is political. So can you run for office? Would you think of it? What would you do? Because I frankly think that we have this game rock paper scissors. I'm sure you've seen it. Rock paper. And one thing's over another. We're in this world of intersectionality where people keep trying to find. Now it's turned into many. Rock. It's only a triumvirate, a little triangle of power. The rock beats the scissors, which beats the paper, which covers the rock. I never figured that part out. But now we have the intersectionality, which is a hierarchy of victimhood. So we're regressing, back into childhood. I mean, a lot of the things you're pointing out of being spoiled are childhood things where you can't hear things, and where you tunnel down and you cover your eyes, and you think make the world not exist. You drug yourself. So this childhood aspect coincides with very fanciful things. It's okay. My I'm not going to name which one, but one of my kids, we were talking about Batman and Superman. One of my kids was virulent and nearly violent when you didn't call him Batman as a kid. Um, when he was really young, in the 3 to 4 year old range, he wore a cape everywhere, and he was Batman. But we didn't. We he outgrew it. But you can't. We indulged him a little bit, but at certain times he wasn't Batman. We had to go to bed. He wasn't Batman, and he didn't run the house, and we didn't turn him into a bat. We didn't release him on the neighborhood to go prowl around and try to catch criminals. He was a child. And so it seems to me that the ultimate goal of all this intersectionality, where people kind of layer their victimhood, is becoming a child. And so we've allowed children to take power over the parental relationship and determine that they are no longer a boy or whatever. And then the parents listen to this because this is their authentic voice. Frankly, it's their Batman voice. It's their I'm a zebra voice. I'm a lion of the woods. This is something that, if there's no concept or no precepts upon which to base. People make fun of religion as antiquated, but oddly enough, it's actually almost more proto scientific and pro scientific than what is espoused in the university and all the STEM and whatnot, because it is not mutable in the sense that the definition of a man and woman is pretty absolute and it's pretty scientifically factual, despite the fact that people wrote about 1,000 years ago. Because guess what? Men and women were men and women 1,000 years ago. They're going to be men and women thousands of years from now. I've met nobody so far who wasn't born from a woman, an actual woman, and I've met nobody who has been born from a guy who declares himself a woman, and so right here in a world of absolutes, it's interesting. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and talk about religion. What are your views on it? How does it factor into your sociologic viewpoint and/or your personal social one?
So you're asking about my religious
No,
views?
not necessarily. I mean, there were different lot of a lot of layers, and you can find the pathway you choose to answer. I mean, the conceptual question is religion kind of hewing the line of actual scientific fact better than
You know what?
some.
It's an interesting question. I also liked how you introduced this question by with this concept of growing up. I think that religion, as it has been institutionalized at the moment in the world, is basically so dogmatic and is in such a way institutionalized that you only sort of have your own worldview being reproduced, and that everybody with different views is being seen as an enemy or a threat. This is basically, I think, that religion has very often become, and why religion is now also in the center of so many conflicts. Yeah. So, and in this way, I also think that you can see woke culture at the University of Amsterdam also as a religion. And in many ways, this whole belief of science in objective truth is also, in a way, religion, because we know from philosophers like Bruno Latour and other philosophers of science that objective truth doesn't really exist. That we produce always. So if we think about it philosophically very deeply, then we should always be reflexive on ourselves and always take into account our own role as a scientist and be reflexive of all our blind spots. Yeah. So in that sense, I think a grown-up scientist is the opposite of being a child. The grown-up scientist should always be aware of her or his own dogma, of her or his own religiosity, and religiosity. What's it called?
Yep.
And should be very aware. And so for me, I am a spiritual person more than I make that distinction. For me, it's a proper distinction, a useful distinction, a distinction between spirituality and religion. Because for me, spirituality is not about learning and following a dogma in a hierarchical institution, but spirituality is more like like Jung, basically, how Carl Jung conceptualized it, becoming an individual. So basically, Carl Jung said being enlightened, as they speak about it in Eastern religions and philosophies, he said basically that is a metaphor for being individualized, being an individual. The more you are autonomous, the more you are aware of your own codependencies with your parents, with your brothers, with your friends, with your lover. And the more you try to break free of all these codependencies, the more you are an autonomous person. And so for me, I think that we do need a new concept of growing up. What does it mean to grow up? I think that is something that we need to also tell our students at the University of Amsterdam, because I think you're right. It's a very inconvenient truth, but a lot of these students who see themselves as critical, as woke, as progressive, as open-minded, are in fact very childish, and they cover it up with this facade of being inclusive and being diverse and appreciating equity. It's not the case. So I think we should break this taboo and speak very freely about the fact that a lot of students and also faculty staff basically is not grown up. And what growing up means is becoming independent, autonomous, free thinker, the free mind. Eh? If you look at the tradition of free thinkers in the world, also in the Western world, that were they laid the foundation for the Enlightenment and for the universities and for freedom throughout the world. These people are often, again, I come back to this word of being brave. They were brave because they broke out of the dominant structures and they dared to think for themselves without knowing how the world would respond because they were looking for new patterns. And I think this is something that our students should really learn very quickly.
Well, that's excellent. So we're heading towards the end of the hour. I do want to show a few pages that relate to you so people can get a sense of what your writing is and maybe also how they can reach out and try to contact you and or help you and help promote your thoughts and concepts. Here you are on Twitter. Um,
Yes.
so the spelling is kind of different from what we might presume, but people can find some of your links on Twitter.
Yeah.
Uh, there's
My link tree, my website. Yeah.
yes, Linktree and Laurens Buijs. This hassle has, I'm not sure how good the translation is. Um,
Excellent.
this hassle has destroyed my career.
Yeah.
Um, there's an article here in De Volkskrant. Um, and what else we have here? So this is meet Laurens Buijs, whistleblower at the University of Amsterdam. Um, and anyways, how the left scapegoated me. Maybe just briefly, you can tell us what a scapegoat historically was. I'm not sure how good your grounding is in the. Um, are you aware how scapegoat came to be?
No, but I can tell you. I would love to hear your perspective on it. But I can tell you very quickly what I associated it with. I associated first of all with the position of the Jew, of being the ever excluded person who is stigmatized and who is being seen as the cause of all trouble. And I also associated with the figure of Christ, who carried the cross and who was put on the cross and who was blamed for everything, and in a way who was in fact innocent. So I see it as an innocent person who is falsely accused of basically everything you can think of. What's your perspective,
Well,
Randall?
I remember it slightly, but I'm just going to go right to our friend Mr. Wikipedia here. It's in the Bible. A scapegoat is one of a pair of kid goats that's released in the wilderness, taking with it all sins and impurities, while the other is sacrificed. So it doesn't seem like you want to be either one of those per se. But people, I think terms probably been transmuted a little bit. Um, but we'll leave that
Interesting.
there.
Yeah?
Um, so as far as other links to you, there's you have your website here with your hair combed actually, and then you've been interviewed um, by uh, my friend Michaela Shippers and um, Enrico Brewer. How do you Brewer?
Nico Verhoeven.
Yeah, and we're gonna probably leave it there. I just always
Rico
like to leave.
Brouwer. Rico Brouwer. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I like to leave with a little self promotion. We'll come back to us in a second, but this is my book here, Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. Um, and I recommend people read it. It goes, it's not quite aligned with what you're saying, but it's interesting because my book, I'm that guy, uh, Hans Christian Andersen, I think he's Danish, wrote The Emperor's New Clothes, and everybody can't say within the coterie. So I think this has to do with the university, the academy. Nobody is mentioning the fact that Zika was thought to be a pandemic in 2015-16, but it's never returned. It's been total quiet, and nobody mentions it. There's a whole research industry still going on, $1 billion research industry, and they're coming out with a Zika vaccine very shortly for a problem that doesn't exist. Zika is real. Zika is a real virus. There are 4 dengues. I brought my prop with me. I carry it everywhere I go. There are literally four dengue strains, and Zika is kind of the little mini fifth one over here. And it's unlike my hand, which the thumb is most useful. Zika is probably the least important of those dengue. It doesn't cause any human illness, and dengues in general have never caused microcephaly. So microcephaly is real. But at the time of 2015, there were no firm standards throughout Brazil. There were literally no zero clinical Zika tests because Zika never caused human illness. And people just they kind of jumped the gun, associated it, and it became a panic and a pandemic. And then it attracted billions of dollars in research funding. And so the people who are doing it are doing okay, but the rest of the world is not. And nobody has come back to explain to them. So this is
Yeah.
kind of it's a little bit like the University of Amsterdam thing, where the university is collecting from the taxpayers, but not necessarily serving them. So I think that's the analogy I'm going to make to your case, because I can. Um, so I recommend people buy my book if they want to support this podcast. I recommend they buy the book if they want to learn about that. I recommend they buy the book if they just want to, spend extra money. They don't have to read it, but they do have to buy it. I'm joking about that. Anyway, so final words before we close for today.
I think about concerning your book, I think it's interesting that you were already debunking a pandemic before now. Eh?
Yeah, no, I started in 2019, before there was COVID-19, at least
Before
before we knew
COVID.
about it.
And I think it's so important because I think debunking what has happened during the pandemic will be so crucial for justice in the world to coming years. Because in my view, it has been a crime what has been happening during COVID. The COVID policies, the COVID approach, the vaccination policies, I think it was absolutely unacceptable. And we have to think through how science came to be so complicit in this scheme. Because I think then we will learn a lot about what we talked about today, the problems of science and how we can heal science. So I think your book should be important in this whole debate.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm going to give my own uh, closing statements. First of all, I'm very much appreciative you're here. I enjoy talking with you. Um, and I went to the RFK Jr. announcement for presidency. He's running as a Democrat, and he's related to the Kennedy dynasty that was here, um, and as his name implies. Um, but he was on with Piers Morgan on a show, and as far as the ad hominem attacks, this kind of magical words. So he was against kind of the promotion of the Zika vaccine at the cost of it, of ignoring therapeutics. I mean, if we had done that for HIV, if we had said we're going to wait for a vaccine, guys, it's 1983, sit tight, don't do any of that sex stuff, and wait for the vaccine, and we'd be like 40 years later. Check my watch. No vaccine. And what? People can't wait for a vaccine. And in Zika, same thing. They told women not to have children until there's a Zika vaccine. This is 8 years and counting, no vaccine. So, to wait for a vaccine, hunker down, this lockdown concept was crazy, idiotic. I don't want to get too far into that. It's not another day, another talk. But RFK Jr. was on with Piers Morgan, and Piers Morgan says, "Oh, what about people say you're anti-vax," which is they're always like people say, you did this. People say you murdered your kitten. Uh, you know, I mean, it's kind of a weird way of doing it. I think it's very cowardly. Piers Morgan, sorry, I like you in a lot of ways, but not that. And so RFK Jr. Said, look, I was against. He's got a very bad voice, so I'm not going to imitate him per se, but he basically said, I was against having mercury in the ocean because we didn't want to eat mercury-laden fish, and so I was preventive about a dangerous thing there. Am I anti-fish? You don't call me anti-fish, which I thought was a good line. But all this,
Good
just to
one.
call people something, you're anti-vax, you're a denier, you're
Oh, it's so
a bird.
sick.
It's like it's trivia again. It's almost like childhood. Getting back to that, we
It's
used to say
like
people, oh,
bullying.
I don't know what you have there, but we have cooties. You have cooties.
Yeah.
Means that you're poisoned and whatnot. Actually, I
Yeah.
think that come from the Black Death or something like that, the plague,
Yeah.
when those things were actually infective and so forth. Now we don't have any real infections that are massive, like Black Death and whatnot, like whatnot. So we've kind of like transformed them into other ways of controlling people. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. You and I can stick around and chat. We're going to say goodbye to everybody else. Thank you so much for being on my show, and you're always welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right.